The lights of Las Vegas glittered like 1,000 stars fallen to earth. But backstage at the Hilton, Elvis Presley stood quietly in the wings. It was June 1972, and the king of rock and roll was about to take the stage once more. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but Elvis felt strangely distant, almost melancholic. Something about the night felt heavier than usual. Not bad, just different. He adjusted his collar, nodded to the band, and stepped into the spotlight as the curtain rose. Applause thundered through the room. He smiled, gave his familiar wave, and launched into the opening number. But as he sang, his eyes wandered past the footlights and into the sea of faces. Then, something stopped him. Just for a second. A man, sitting 12 rows back on the aisle, caught his eye. Something about him tugged at a memory buried deep in Elvis's past. The music rolled on, but Elvis's focus wavered. He continued singing, his voice smooth and powerful as ever, but inside, his mind was racing. That face, that man. There was something hauntingly familiar about him, not just in appearance, but in posture, in the way he sat with his hands folded calmly in his lap, his head tilted slightly, watching with a quiet kind of intensity. Between verses, Elvis glanced again, trying not to make it obvious. The house lights were dim, but he could make out just enough. The man was older now, maybe late 30s, early 40s, with lines etched into his face, like someone who had seen hard times. He wore a plain brown jacket and no flashy jewelry like the rest of the Vegas crowd. But those eyes, they sparked something deep in Elvis's memory. A dusty road, a slingshot, laughter, music on a battered porch. As the second song faded and the band began the intro to the next, Elvis subtly stepped toward the edge of the stage. He squinted through the lights once more. There it was again, a smile. Not the kind fans give a performer, not awe or admiration. Something softer, familiarity, recognition. And suddenly, it hit him. Jesse Franklin. Elvis felt his breath catch in his throat. Jesse had been his best friend growing up in Tupelo. They were inseparable, the two poor boys with big dreams and empty pockets. Jesse was the one who showed Elvis how to skip rocks, who shared his lunch when Elvis forgot his, who sat beside him during those long afternoons on the porch, humming along while Elvis practiced chords on a second-hand guitar. But they had lost touch. Jesse's family had moved out of town when they were barely teenagers. No phone, no forwarding address, just one day. Gone. Now here he was, decades later, sitting in a Vegas showroom while the most famous man in the world tried to keep from completely falling apart on stage. Elvis turned back to the mic, but his voice faltered for the briefest second. The audience didn't notice, but the band did. His longtime guitarist gave him a puzzled glance. Elvis shook his head slightly, regaining composure. He finished the song, barely aware of the lyrics. In his heart, one phrase echoed over and over again, like a song of its own. "Is that really you, Jesse? After all these years?" The Mississippi sun baked the dirt roads of Tupelo until they shimmered like waves. It was 1946, and a skinny 9-year-old boy named Elvis Presley stood barefoot outside a tiny shotgun house, strumming a battered guitar that buzzed on every chord. The only other soul around was Jesse Franklin, wild-haired, brown-skinned, always grinning, sitting on an upturned milk crate with a harmonica in his hands. They had been friends since Elvis could walk. Jesse lived 2 houses down, and their families often leaned on one another to get by. Both boys came from nothing, just tin roofs, cornbread dinners, and hand-me-down dreams. But together, they made the world a little lighter. "You know," Jesse had once said, You're gonna be famous someday. I'll be the one sitting front row, clapping like a fool." Elvis had laughed, brushing the comment off like dust. But Jesse meant it. He always believed in him, even when Elvis didn't believe in himself. There were afternoons when the two of them would sneak into town and listen outside the radio store window. They'd press their ears to the glass and soak in gospel choirs and country singers as if it were oxygen. Jesse taught Elvis to harmonize. Elvis taught Jesse how to pluck strings without breaking them. They were more than friends. They were a two-man band dreaming of stages they had no way of reaching. But childhood is never as permanent as it feels. One winter morning, Elvis came knocking and found Jesse's house empty. No chairs, no curtains, no Jesse, just a chalk message on the stoop. Gone to Jackson. That was it. No goodbye, no letter. For years, Elvis looked for him in crowds, at shows, in bus stations, even in the eyes of strangers on the street. But Jesse was like a melody half-remembered, sweet, aching, and just out of reach. And now, standing under stage lights in Las Vegas, that melody had returned. The years had changed them both. One became the king of rock and roll. The other? Who knew what road Jesse had walked? But somehow, in a city of lights and illusion, fate had brought them back to the same song, the same place, at the same time. And in Elvis's heart, a decision was forming, quiet, certain, and deeply human. He had to know for sure. He had to ask. Elvis wiped his brow as the final chord of "Can't Help Falling in Love" faded into the applause. His heart was racing, not from the song, not from the crowd, but from the moment he was about to create. He stepped forward, closer to the edge of the stage. The house lights dimmed, but he motioned toward the sound crew. "Light up the audience a little," he said into the mic, his voice casual but trembling underneath. The lights slowly rose, and the sea of faces became clearer. Row 12. Aisle seat. The man was still there, still watching him, not with the wide-eyed wonder of a fan, but with something deeper. Familiarity. Memory. Elvis stared at him, almost forgetting the thousands of people still watching. "Forgive me," Elvis said into the microphone, his southern drawl slowing to a thoughtful rhythm. "But I need to ask someone a question." The room went still. "You there," he said, pointing gently. "Sir, what's your name?" The man looked around, stunned. He hesitated, then stood. "Jesse," he said softly. Elvis's breath caught in his chest. He didn't wait for permission. He stepped off the stage, down the steps, walking slowly into the crowd like he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. The audience parted for him in stunned silence. He stopped just feet away from the man he hadn't seen in nearly 3 decades. "Jesse Franklin?" he asked. Jesse nodded, his eyes already glassy with tears. "Yeah," he whispered. "It's me." Elvis took a deep breath and laughed softly. "I thought I was seeing a ghost." Then, louder, to the stunned crowd, he said, "Y'all, this man right here, he was my best friend when we were kids. We grew up together in Tupelo. We made music before I even knew what music was. And now, here he is." The room erupted, not in wild cheers, but something warmer. Awe, emotion, human connection. "I don't believe in coincidence," Elvis said, turning back to Jesse. "You came here tonight for a reason." He reached out his hand. "Come on up here with me, brother." Jesse hesitated. His hands trembled as he took Elvis's outstretched arm. Security instinctively moved, but Elvis waved them off. "He's with me," he said. As the two men climbed the steps and returned to the stage, the spotlight followed them. The band stood frozen, unsure what was happening. But the audience? They were locked in. Phones were down, mouths were open, eyes were wet. Elvis turned to the crowd, his voice steady now. "Let me tell you something about this man." He placed a gentle hand on Jesse's shoulder. "When I was 9 years old, my mama couldn't always pack a lunch for school. Jesse here, he'd split his sandwich with me, every single time. Peanut butter, bologna, whatever he had, I got half. That's the kind of friend he was." Jesse chuckled, trying to hold it together. "You always wanted the half with more jelly," he muttered, drawing laughter from the audience. Elvis laughed too, but then he grew quiet. "We used to sit on a wooden porch and sing old hymns till the sun went down. Two broke kids who didn't know what the world would become. He taught me as much about soul as any preacher ever did." He turned to the band and nodded. "Let's do one we haven't done in a long time." One of the musicians handed Jesse a guitar. He held it like it was made of glass. His fingers hesitated, then found the strings, muscle memory rising from deep within. Elvis whispered, "Remember Peace in the Valley?" Jesse nodded slowly. "Always." The two began to sing, voices blending in imperfect harmony. Not polished, not rehearsed, but real, raw, pure. Elvis's deep tone wrapped around Jesse's lighter, wavering voice like a brother's arm. The audience was silent. Not a rustle, not a whisper. Just the hum of two boys from Tupelo, standing side by side under Vegas lights, picking up a song they'd left behind long ago. When they finished, the room exploded into a standing ovation. But Elvis wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Jesse, eyes full of tears, a smile that only childhood could bring. And for the first time that night, Elvis Presley didn't feel like a star. He felt like a boy who had just found his brother again. The stage felt still, even as the applause rang through the room. Elvis gave a soft nod to the band to hold, then turned back to Jesse, who was wiping a tear with the sleeve of his old jacket. The moment had shifted. It was no longer a concert, not in the traditional sense. It had become something sacred. Two old friends, reunited by fate and music, standing together under the bright lights like no time had passed at all. "Let's do one more," Elvis said, his voice just above a whisper but carrying across the room. "The one we used to mess up every single Sunday." Jesse laughed knowingly. "You mean the one we never finished without your mama telling us to hush?" "The very one," Elvis grinned. He looked to the band again. "I'll Fly Away, key of G." Jesse strummed the first chord, a little uncertain at first, but Elvis joined in immediately, his foot tapping the beat, and soon their voices lifted together. "Some glad morning when this life is o'er." The harmony wasn't perfect. Jesse's voice cracked slightly on the high notes, and Elvis occasionally strayed off rhythm. But none of that mattered. It was raw, human, and real. The audience knew they were witnessing something that couldn't be rehearsed. It was the sound of history and friendship echoing through the room. Midway through the song, Elvis looked over and saw Jesse smile. Not the nervous, hesitant smile from earlier, but a full, boyish grin. That same smile from the days of paper lunch sacks and barefoot summer walks. For a brief moment, Vegas disappeared. The stage lights melted into Tupelo sunshine, and the room became that old front porch with peeling paint and a broken step. When they hit the final line, "I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away," Elvis let his voice trail off, allowing Jesse's to carry it home. A single acoustic strum followed, and then silence. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of memory, meaning, and the unmistakable sense that something important had just happened. And then the crowd erupted. Not just applause, not just cheers. They stood, many with hands over their hearts, some with tears in their eyes, some clasping the hands of the person next to them, not because they knew the story, but because they felt it. It wasn't just a performance, it was a reunion of souls. As the applause faded, Elvis stepped forward again, this time with no guitar, no showmanship, just a microphone and a full heart. "I want to say something real quick," he began, his voice soft but sure. "We've been all over the world, played for kings and queens, presidents, thousands of people. But nothing, and I mean nothing, means more to me than standing here tonight beside someone who knew me before all that." He looked over at Jesse, who nodded humbly, still in disbelief. "This man right here," Elvis continued, "he knew me when I had holes in my shoes. When my biggest dream was to one day own a guitar that didn't buzz on every string. He knew me when I was just a scared little kid with a big voice and no clue what to do with it." The crowd listened intently. You could feel the shift in the room, from concert to conversation, from fan experience to shared humanity. "I've met a lot of people," Elvis said. "Thousands, maybe millions. But you don't forget the ones who believed in you before the world did. You don't forget the ones who walked beside you when nobody else even saw you coming." He paused, swallowing back the lump in his throat. "And I just want to say, if you've got someone like that in your life, someone who knew you back when, don't wait till fate throws them in the 12th row. Pick up the phone. Find them. Tell them what they mean to you. Because life's too short. And these moments, they don't come around often." The room was quiet again, not from disinterest, but reverence. A kind of communal understanding had swept through the audience. "Jesse," Elvis said, turning back to his friend, "thank you for always seeing me, even when I wasn't anything to see." Jesse stepped forward, his voice shaking. "You were always something to see, Elvis. You just didn't know it yet." They embraced, not like a performer and a guest, but like two men who had traveled long roads and somehow found each other again at the right moment. And that was the final bow. Not choreographed, not planned. Just two boys from Tupelo, standing tall. And the lesson was clear. Never forget where you came from. The camera fades slightly from the stage, and the narrator's voice returns, calm, reflective, and warm. Sometimes, life gives us unexpected reminders of what truly matters. The footage lingers on Elvis and Jesse walking off stage together, arm in arm. The lights dim behind them, but the emotional glow remains. "What we witnessed tonight wasn't just a musical reunion," the narrator continues. "It was a story of roots, of loyalty, of a friendship that outlived fame, fortune, and time." The narrator speaks directly to the viewer now. Ask yourself, who was your Jesse? Who stood by you before the world noticed? Who gave you a piece of their sandwich, their time, their belief, when they had very little to give? The screen flashes with soft black and white photos. Two boys fishing. A dusty front porch. An old guitar case. These could be anyone's memories. They could be yours. Elvis didn't just sing a song tonight, the narrator adds. He reminded us of something we all need to hear. That every stage we stand on, every victory we reach, it was built on the shoulders of those who loved us when we had nothing. The final footage returns to Elvis's face. Not the stage version of the king, but the real one. No rhinestones. No ego. Just gratitude. If this story moved you, the narrator concludes, share it with someone who's been part of your journey. The world needs more reminders that loyalty still matters, that kindness, memory, and humility are what truly make a legacy. Then the final message fades in slowly. In Elvis's own words, "Never measure a man by his fame. Measure him by how well he remembers those who helped him climb. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's been part of your journey. Tag a friend who believed in you before the world did, and remind them they still matter. More inspiring true stories coming soon. Stay connected.